All right, so hello everyone and welcome to Behavioral Science Week 2024, our session on behavioral science and organizational behavior. So my name is Mary McLennan. I'm the Senior Advisor on Behavioral Science to the Executive Office of the Secretary General, also lead an initiative called the UN Behavioral Science Group, which I will come to shortly, but I will be moderating today's discussion today. Before we get into that, what I will say just a little bit about Behavioral Science Week. So we're bringing together 38 UN entities this year, so the biggest and most diverse behavioral science week that we've had so far. You can see there's a lot to unpack both for over the next few days on topics like sustainability and health and peace and security, so lots more to explore if you haven't checked out the agenda already. So we'll put in the chat the links to Behavioral Science Week, as well as the UN Behavioral Science Group, which you can join whether you're in the UN or outside, in addition to UN 2.0, which is some of the broader agenda, which you might be interested in knowing about with respect to behavioral science in the UN. All right, okay, so with that, on to the content of today's session. So the way we'll run this is that we want to have a lot of discussion with our panelists regarding their work and experience with behavioral science in the UN. And we ask for you to do this. You put your questions in the Q&A box. This is at the bottom of your screen. You can also upvote the questions of your colleagues there if you don't have one yourself. We ask that you please do not put your questions into the chat because we won't be taking them from there to keep us organized and also all kind of aligned, put them in the Q&A box. Okay, great. So with that, on to our panel for today. So we'll be hearing from 4 speakers about, again, their experiences with behavioral science and organizational behavior more broadly. So first we'll hear from Caroline Pike from the IAEA, second from Gagan Vazir from UN-DOS, third, Juliana de Araujo Ribeiro from UN DMSPC, as well as Adriana Alberti from UN DESA. So with that, we have a lot to unpack today. So I'm going to kick it right off and send it over to our panelists. So Caroline, over to you. And just to say, I don't think Caroline's video is working with us today, but we can hear her clearly and see her slides. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Mary, for the introductions. Sorry, my camera isn't working. I'm having a technical difficulty. But before we start the session, I just want to say a few words. So first of all, think about what makes any organization successful in achieving its missions and goals. It's the characteristics and the capabilities of people, the quality of their interactions with each other, and the environment that they work in. The organization's success can be enabled by ensuring that individuals have the skills and competencies that they need to perform, and by building a collective mindset and shared values that support the organization's priorities. So the focus of this session is on the application of behavioral science concepts and methods to organization behavior and performance. Our speakers will discuss how they use behavioral science in areas ranging from recruiting of new employees, competency development, and capacity building in individuals, to the internalization of values and behaviors. How do we get people aligned around the important organization values, and then building organization cultures that support the mandates of the organization. So I'm really pleased to hear the inputs of these other people, each from different organizations, and I look forward to the session. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Caroline. Just setting us up with some remarks about behavioral science and organizational behavior more generally. So I didn't give her enough introduction perhaps, but she's a specialist. She's been working in this area across organizations over a number of years. So with that, Caroline, would you like to share your slides and do your presentation? Caroline, can you hear me? Oh, we may have an issue with Caroline. Oh, there we go.
Sorry, I muted and then I forgot to unmute. Okay. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see the slides. If you want to go full screen, that would be great.
Okay, I'm waiting for it to. There.
Perfect.
Okay, so thank you again for the introduction, and I'm really pleased to share some of the work that I'm doing in IAEA. I'm going to talk about organization culture for nuclear safety, and a few things, introductory comments first. I know all of us don't know what all of the other organizations do. And so I want to just say a little bit about IAEA. So the International Atomic Energy is the world's central intergovernmental forum for scientific and technical cooperation in the nuclear field, working for safe, secure, and peaceful uses of nuclear science and technology, and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And those goals that we address are shown on the talk here on the slide. So the focus of my talk, I'll be describing an approach used to measure organization culture as it relates to safety. So this isn't so much a study about outcomes, it's more about the process, the research methods. A little bit of background, I think, will help you understand when I talk about the research approach. So in the way of context, here a few pieces of information might be important. So first of all, safety culture, this terminology was introduced into the nuclear terminology after the disaster at Chernobyl in 1986. There was an accident in the nuclear power plant that caused a total meltdown, disrupted many lives for many years. Lives were lost. People received high doses of radiation. So it was quite a big disaster. And in the analysis of that event, the underlying safety culture came up as one of the contributing issues. So since that time, the idea of safety culture has been integrated into international requirements. That is, all nuclear organizations are required to assess their safety culture. So let's talk a little bit about why that's important. Safety of operations depends on behavior, what people do or don't do every day. And behavior is influenced by the culture. And so it's important to create the culture where people are most likely to behave correctly. That is, do the things that they need to do to support safety, have the attitudes that they need to have to support safety. And so we have an idea about what those attitudes and norms and behaviors are. IAEA has developed a framework that describes what the characteristics of a healthy safety culture are. So we think we have an idea based on research and operating experience about what good culture looks like, what you're supposed to see in a healthy safety culture. And so assessment and measurement of the culture is the first step to shaping it, to ensure that you're building the culture in the organization that will enable and encourage and reward people for doing the right things at the right times. So the assessment method that I'm going to describe is it's used, it's a service that IAEA provides to nuclear facilities in all of the member nations. So we'll have a team of people who will go to a site and conduct the assessment and do the analysis and then provide the results to the owners, the operators of the nuclear facility. Okay, so a little bit of background on the theoretical framework, for lack of a better term, because it is the foundation for the assessment approach that I'll describe. So first of all, in order to shape culture, in order to make it the way you want it to be, an understanding of both what is happening and why it is happening is important. And so this iceberg model was introduced by an organization psychologist many years ago in the 80s, I believe, uh, Edgar Schein. And his framework suggests that the good way to understand culture or to think about culture is the idea of an iceberg. And we all know that, an iceberg, the tip of it is above the surface. You can see that. And, the rest of the iceberg, the mass, 90% of it is invisible from the surface. And so the idea is that the assessment determines not only those things above the surface that you can see, such as, the outcomes, the safety, what happens, the events, but also, and the procedures and the equipment and the charts and the guidance and the building layout, and then the behaviors, what people are doing. You can watch to see what people are doing, So that's part of it, but that's just 10%. Those are the tangible, visible aspects. But the methodology also seeks to understand those things that you can't see. So to understand what are the underlying basic assumptions and beliefs, how do people really perceive the nature of their reality, and what's expected and accepted in the organization. And so this framework is sort of foundational to the methodological approach. Okay, so this is a summary of the methodology used for assessing culture. It's a social science research approach utilizing both quantitative and qualitative methods. So in the area of quantitative, well, we use a survey. Everybody's familiar with organization surveys. And this quantitative data allows us to apply descriptive statistics and factor analysis, multiple regression, et cetera, to understand how people say they think about the organization, what they believe to be true about certain aspects of the organization. We also use qualitative methods, interviews, focus groups, observations, and this allows for the content and thematic analysis, the quantitative data analysis, affinity techniques, things like that. So the data is collected using all these different methods and then analyzed to identify these cultural patterns and describe the state of the culture. So we collect a lot of different information from a lot of different methods and then begin to put it together to see how these pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, fit together. Okay, I will say that this is, I would call it exploratory science or discovery science. The aim of the method is to understand the nature of culture and then identify the impacts of that culture, how the culture is, how that may or may not have a positive or negative influence on safety and safe behaviors and safe operations, as opposed to an experimental science that aims to confirm or prove a theory or disprove a theory. So I call it exploratory. It's an inductive reasoning process. So, what are the benefits of such an approach? I'm not going to go into detail on the methods. I'm assuming people have some familiarity with these. But, the benefits and risks. So, each of the methods has its own built in strengths and limitations. Surveys are good because you can hear from a lot of people in a short time. A disadvantage is that it gives you an opportunity to hear what their perceptions are, their beliefs, but not necessarily why they have those beliefs or if what they believe is actually true. And so it gives you some information, but not all the information. Focus groups and interviews give you the opportunity to get in-depth information, broad and deep, to really understand how people are thinking about things, why they think about things the way they do, what they believe, why the organization works the way it does. And so you get a different kind of deeper, more in-depth information that really helps you understand what's going on underneath the surface of the water, that 90% of the iceberg. And so, using these multiple methods instead of just one, a culture survey or some interview or some focus groups, using these multiple methods allows for triangulation of the conclusions and a broader, more multifaceted understanding of the culture. And the multifaceted understanding is important because culture itself is multifaceted. I mean, it's a big animal with a lot of parts, and so this multi-method approach is really important. A kind of a challenge around it is that the approach is inductive. It's based on inductive reasoning, and that means as opposed to deductive reasoning, which is more the traditional experimental scientific model. So, inductive reasoning, you start with a lot of information and then find the patterns and then aim to make generalizations or theories based on the data that you're looking at rather than starting with a theory and trying to prove it. And the challenge with this is, as was quoted by Daryl Meisner, I think, I didn't quote him here. The inductive reasoning, you can say in deduction, if all the premises are true, then the conclusion is necessarily true. But in inductive reasoning, if all the premises are true, the conclusion is probably true, depending on how good the data is that you've collected and how you've interpreted it. And so it becomes very important to be very thorough and rather detail oriented about your data collection, making sure that it's thorough and comprehensive, and then putting it together in such a way that your conclusions, your theories about the culture of the organization are probably true. So that's really, I know we have short presentations here, so I'll stop now. I forgot to time myself, but I'll stop now, and I look forward to your questions after all of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Caroline. Some interesting methods for us to reflect upon. We often talk about, great. We often talk about randomized control trials and field experiments in behavioral science, but some interesting methods when it comes to qualitative and quantitative and thinking about how to reflect upon more of the organizational culture thinking and from an academic viewpoint. So thank you for that. Okay, so now that we've gone a bit more technical to kick us off, now we're going to go to a bit more concrete and practical example of behavioral science in the UN. So over to Gagan from DOS for your presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, so give me 1 second. Okay. Hopefully everyone is able to see my screen. Do flag if that's not the case.
Could you full screen, Gagan? Is it possible in the bottom right corner?
Is it not full screen? Let's try that again. Is it not showing us full screen on your side?
No, it's not. You need to retry.
Interesting.
Okay.
How about now?
No.
Now?
Maybe try sharing.
Let's try one more time.
Yeah, there you go.
Technology is always a challenge. Okay, let's try this. Do we see a full screen now by any chance?
No, we don't. I don't know
No.
exactly what's happened, but I think it should be all right. Maybe we can just proceed.
Let me just make this a little bigger then, and see if we cannot solve this issue. Okay. This might be better. If not, I'll proceed regardless. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gagan Masir. As Mary mentioned, I'm in DOS, which is the Department of Operational Support. And within DOS, we've been working to think through how we can, again, better integrate behavioral science practices and actually apply it within our work. For context, DOS is an operational provider for the UN Secretariat, as well as the missions. So it's administrative in many functions, and it's rife for opportunities when it comes to embedding behavioral science. And today we'll talk to an actual concrete project that we led recently to think through how we can apply behavioral science. One of the core aspects of DOS is really around decision-making and judgment. So for context in a DOS's landscape, as I mentioned, we are service providers. And what that means is we're either making, and I use the word making loosely here, or informing, often the case, decisions that impact our clients. Those can be related to why certain, how certain HR rule is applied, thinking through perhaps on the supply chain front, why certain actions might have to happen for subsequent actions to happen. And so we're really the purveyor of decisions or decisions that have already been made by others. And by virtue of that, it's actually quite important that our clients both understand how we make decisions, and perhaps often more importantly, that they accept the decisions that are being made. As this helps reduce perhaps the time it takes to make subsequent decisions. But we also kind of reckon that the clients don't always have insight into how that first decision was made. In particular, we'll kind of flag an example, let's say around human capital and HR and recruitment. We have systems in place where other individuals that are perhaps not on your respective team making hiring decisions or making recruitment decisions that you can either accept or reject. And depending on whether or not you accept or reject it, can determine how long subsequent recruitment processes take. So with that in mind, we were trying to really understand what factors influence an individual's acceptance or rejection of another person's judgment, i.e., how likely am I to accept, let's say in this case, what Mary is saying and what Mary does into my own decision making. And so what we did to think through this large question was we wanted to leverage behavioral science and really understand the components of decision making and trust. We are a department that's fairly nascent when it comes to behavioral science, so we have partnered loosely with the University of College London, and they have a behavioral science team that is really inspired by the department's work. And we leverage individuals who are studying behavioral science there to really run experiments, deploying and employing the department's work within the more external space. And so, of course, we had to kind of start with that and think to how do we define the scope of this project, right? When we're thinking about decision making and trust, it's very large. And when we think of the department's work, it touches everything from supply chain, medical services, administrative services, HR. And so we had to kind of first think to where exactly within our service lines do we want to try a behavioral science project. So we picked a topic that we felt was a bit more universal, that many individuals, regardless of kind of where you actually work, are impacted. And that was focusing on recruitment and hiring and how hiring managers make decisions. Because likely at some point, almost every individual will have some role to play in the hiring process. The hiring process, of course, yes.
Sorry, just to come in and ask, have you changed the slides or are we still on the cover slide?
We are on the second slide. Do you not see that?
We see this still the first one. Would you mind advancing them?
Let's try, yeah, so let me try that again.
Maybe use the page up, page down. That sometimes works better.
How about now?
Yeah, still the cover slide.
Interesting.
Again, I think you need, now it moves. Yes.
Okay, now it moved. Let me try not sharing, not going to presentation mode. That might be easiest. Can you see slide number 2 now?
Leveraging behavioral science to understand components.
Blended. Okay. Thank you. And so, that was our first aspect, thinking about what area do we focus in on. Second, within the hiring space, we wanted to think about where exactly do we want to look at trust. And we focus here particularly around CV judgment, because that's really one of the earliest stages by which decisions are being made. And then, even within that, there's so many components around what influences can happen when it comes to decision making in the HR space. We had to think about how do we limit our scope even further, because there's so many complexities in the space. And so what we in working with our partners at UCL, thinking through limiting variables. So here we thought about country and workplace values, thinking through what are values and traits that individuals might have in common that might either help them accept or reject a decision. So here we're thinking about, again, how do we prime someone around that another person is similar or dissimilar to them, and then what information can we provide them that might nudge them to, again, accept or reject a decision. Once we define the scope, we then, of course, had to set up the experiment. And we kind of recognized that the space we were in, of course, had some limitations. And our partners at University of College London were able to then engage with really non-UN participants who resemble the UN hiring manager demographics, right? So we had to actually do a lot of due diligence to think through what does a hiring manager at the UN look and feel like, and can we recruit candidates or people in the outside world who perhaps mimic that, by virtue of that might have similar behaviors and tactics. And then really, for us, based on academic research with our partners, we found that we had to use trust as a mediating factor, as an intermediary between what might influence an individual to go from seeing someone else's decision to perhaps accepting or rejecting that. And then broadly, as you kind of thought about this experiment, we had, of course, had to think about like, any outputs we get would, of course, have limitations. And I think that was quite important for us to recognize that this would not be a silver bullet, nor would the answers for any research really be universal. And so, we had to kind of recognize the fact that even though we're only looking at things like country and workplace values, there's other variables, age, their area of expertise, that could be a factor in the decision to accept or reject. We, of course, only looked at one part of the process, which was CV judgment. The hiring process is quite complicated and long and has many other components to it. And so we had to recognize that, again, there's only one component to it. And then the reality of the fact that the UN hiring process is quite nuanced, and that an actual experiment with external people may not fully cover the gamut of kind of what the process looks and feels like. Regardless of kind of, of that, we still proceeded with the experiment, and what you see in the middle is essentially kind of how the experiment worked, right? So individuals, hiring managers, completed a survey around their workplace and their workplace values, and then evaluated a CV that they received. And then they were given another CV to look at, and by virtue and when they received that CV, they were given some insights into the other hiring manager and kind of where they were from and kind of what their workplace values were, so that they could be primed based on, is that person relevant to me or similar to me, and then on the similar front, based on the knowledge that they're given, are they being nudged in the right direction? And then they also, of course, had to do a trust questionnaire around how much trustworthy they find kind of themselves and others. And essentially what we found was the role of group membership in judging other decision making. In particular, group membership does matter, right? If someone is similar to you, whether it's from a workplace values perspective or in this case a nationality perspective, you're more likely to trust their decisions. So in-group decision making and in-group trust is higher than out-group. So what does that actually mean? What does that mean for us in terms of practice, right? So for us, when we think about groups and decision making and getting clients to accept or reject a decision, what we're thinking about next is what information can we share with our clients to effectively prime them to understand and accept decisions, right? So kind of like how do we better prime individuals to accept or reject, and then separately thinking really through how can ideals of group membership become more salient in diverse contexts, right? We're a very diverse institution, diverse department, and our clientele is very diverse. And so we're really right now thinking through what components of group membership, as we think about the various groups that we work with, can we bring up to the fold and emphasize in order to enable those who receive our services, those who receive our decisions, to say, yes, I'm going to accept that, or on the flip side, no, I don't agree. So what I've outlined on this slide really is an ongoing research, right? This is the next topic for us to kind of think through. But what we found broadly in kind of bringing it back to behavioral science is, behavioral science for us within our department has many critical applications. And this topic that we kind of looked through, while it was focused, of course, on the human capital front, we think the takeaways for this are pretty universal. And I'm going to now start to think through how do we actually start applying this into more of our context. I'm going to pause there. Let me turn it back over to Mary for our next speaker. And sorry for all the technical struggles that we had.
Oh, good, Gagan. I think we got there in the end and we followed out. It's really fascinating, interesting how you unpack these ideas and explore them within the DOS context. So there are a few questions for you already, but we'll answer those later. So thanks again. Next over to Juliana for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Mary. Let me just share my slides. Can you see that?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, great. So, hi, I'm Juliana. I work for the Department of Management, Strategy, Policy, and Compliance at the UN Secretariat. And for the purpose of today, I would like to focus on the work that we did last year with the UN System Staff College in integrating a behavioral science approach to change management. So just to set the context, so the UN Secretariat's culture is rooted on 4 values, which are inclusion, integrity, humility, and humanity, and 5 behaviors, which are around in the diagram. that were established through the UN Values and Behaviors Framework in 2021, after an extensive engagement process involving more than 2,500 staff. And since then, what we have aimed to do is to implement the values and behaviors through a culture change approach. And so what we have done, and just also to explain how we have structured the change management approach, we've used this 4 building blocks, which is influenced by the influence model designed by McKinsey, and it focuses on 4 aspects of change, of culture change. The first one is senior leadership role modeling. So of course, leaders set the tone for the entire organization. The actions speak louder than words. We look up to them for cues on how we should behave. It's important that they demonstrate a commitment to the desired culture through their daily behaviors and decision making. And of course, that leading by example inspire trust, credibility, and alignment with cultural values. So we have engaged very extensively with heads of entities across the Secretariat to make sure that they act in accordance to the values and behaviors. The second block is communication and engagement. So to really have transparent and consistent communication to ensure that staff understand what's expected of them. So engaging staff and personnel at all levels to ensure that they grasp the rationale behind culture change, and also soliciting feedback. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Soliciting feedback and actively listening to their concerns. What is making it hard to embody those values and behaviors? The third aspect is learning and development. So providing support for them to develop the skills and knowledge that are aligned to these values and behaviors. And finally, reinforce change via formal mechanisms. So such as policies, processes. So for us, it means how to integrate the values and behaviors into, for example, performance management or staff selection, etc. So as change management is inherently about people, understanding their behaviors, motivations, and biases is really paramount to successful implementation of culture, a culture shift process. Therefore, exploring how we could leverage behavioral science in change management has offered us with quite a powerful toolkit to navigate the complex landscape of organizational transformation, which is a long-term process as well. So given this, in 2023, what we did was to a collaboration with the UN System Staff College, our Office of Human Resources has implemented a program called Values and Behaviors Change Clinics. So we targeted 6 Secretariat entities, so including my own, the Department of Management, Strategy, Policy, and Compliance. So that's part of the management administration pillars, but also entities that are part of the peace and security pillars, the humanitarian and economic social ones. So what we wanted to do was to work with them to apply behavioral science principles to change management so they could develop and implement small-scale pilots to test solutions that encourage staff to bring the values and behaviors to life on an individual and an organizational level. At the same time, what we want to do is to build the entity capacity on how to integrate behavioral science aspects into change management work. So really making it practical. So the aspects that we borrowed from behavioral science as we were going through this process were to apply the EAST principles as they were designing the solutions. So to make it easy, attractive, social, and timely. And also as they were adjusting their super nudges to make sure that they took into consideration the API's criteria in terms of accessibility, practicability, effectiveness, affordability, side effects, and equity as well. So the outcome of it was we ran it from September to December last year, and the outcome was a number of solutions that had been piloted with a small target group, and that will eventually be upscaled across the Secretariat. And because I don't have time to go through all of them, I picked one of them to share with you. So the example I'm going to provide to you is the health check that was designed by the Department of Operational Support, which was one of the entities that participated in the program. So the solution that they came up with was a scenario-based pulse survey allowing staff to self-reflect on how they embodied the UN values in the past week, in the previous week. So the challenge that they were trying to address was how they might nudge staff at all levels to learn and familiarize themselves with the new values and behaviors. And the target group was 41 DOS staff at all levels and under different divisions within the institute. And the outcome that they found, so they've implemented the pilot over a period of 8 weeks, measuring the impact as they went along, and they created this wonderful dashboard that I'm sharing a print screen of. So the outcome and impact was that they got from the participants of the pilots, that they created a chance for participants to change, to pause and self-reflect on what the values and behaviors mean to them and how the values and behaviors can be demonstrated. Because sometimes when we look, at how we define organizational culture, is a bit up here, but the trick is how individually we can demonstrate, considering the work that we do, the role that we play within an organization. And they went beyond. They were surprised that besides learning about what are the values and behaviors, the participants actually used the survey as well to think about what other ways, what other actions they can take to incorporate the values and behaviors into everyday practice. And of course, they established a BI dashboard with the most observed values, which all participants had access on. So the outcome of this pilot was quite successful, and so successful that other entities, they have been also adopted the health check and are already implementing it across their institute. So in terms of our learning, something that we learned with this fairly new approach, at least for me, I'm not a behavioral science expert, is that starting small and simple does not mean it cannot create impact. And to be honest, this sometimes can be counterintuitive in the work of the UN, which is such a huge organization. But really, this was one of the key learning from us. Small, easy, simple. And indeed, our experience showed that the easiest it was for pilot participants to engage with solutions from number of clicks that they had to do, the more open they were to learn and engage around the values and behaviors. The other learning is the importance to engage skeptics, because they are the ones that we will need to work on to understand what are the obstacles and barriers, why they're skeptic about integrating values and behaviors to their work. Again, prototype and pilot and iterate, really keep reflecting on how it can be adjusted and improved, also through engagement with the target audience. Senior sponsor support, we had sponsorship from heads of entities for this project. It's key. It links up to also what I mentioned as one of the building blocks for culture change. And of course, we also counted with expert support throughout from a behavioral science expert who also offered team coaching for the different teams that were engaged in this activity. So I'll stop for now, and I would like to thank you for the opportunity and ready to answer to any questions you have at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you,
Mary,
Juliana.
over to you.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you, Juliana, for your presentation. There's a lot there to unpack about your experience with behavioral science in addition to the results that you have. So there's some questions already in the Q&A. We'll get to those shortly. But now on to our last speaker for today, Adriana from UNDESA. Over to you. Are you there, Adriana?
Sorry, I'm trying to share the screen.
That's all right. Take care. Let us know if you need some help. Perfect. Yeah. And just great.
Yes, you can see that. Thank you very much, Mary, and good morning, good afternoon to all of you who are joining this session. It's a great pleasure to take part in the Behavioral Science Week, and I also want to thank Mary for the opportunity. UNDESA, through the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government, has been working on the topic of changing mindsets in the public sector to promote the Sustainable Development Goals since before the pandemic. And to do so, it has joined forces with various international and regional organizations, including the World Bank, OECD, the World Economic Forum, regional organizations, academia, to produce the first publication on the topic of changing mindsets in public institutions. And based on our research and analysis and the contribution from also schools of public administration from around the world, we have then produced training of trainers toolkits to implement what we learn in our capacity development on the ground. So I would like to provide a bit of a conceptual framework of why we've been focusing on mindsets, and particularly why we're focusing on mindsets in public institutions. So to begin with, we need to recall that a mindset really consists of the beliefs and the attitudes that a person has assimilated throughout their life. And beliefs are what we hold to be true. Now, that does not necessarily correspond to the truth or reality, but this is what frames the way we see things. And so the beliefs are what we, how we interpret the world, and then the attitudes that we hold are related to how we are interacting with the world. And why are mindsets so important? Because they affect behaviors and our actions, and particularly decision-making. So what influences our mindsets, and this is very nicely tied into the previous presentation, is that our mindsets, that is to say what we hold to be true and then how we interact with the world, is heavily influenced by values. And there are two types of values. There are the internal values, personal values, and then of course there are the institutional values that are external, but that are very important. Sorry, let me see. Yes. So why are mindsets important? It's because they shape the way that we see things. So the frames, the perception that we have of the reality around us, the way that we think, so the way that we make sense of situations, and this can be conscious or unconscious, and then the way that we act, which is extremely important because this influences our behaviors. Now, why is it important to change mindsets or shift mindsets to promote effective institutions for sustainable development? And that is, again, because the institutions are composed of, the visible part, which are the norms and rules, but then also of an invisible part. So it's the dual nature of institutions, which contain values and beliefs, which should then inform certain behaviors. And institutional change, there's been a lot of focus on changing the rules and the norms in the past, but much less on really understanding what are the values of that particular institution. So institutional change does not refer only to the change of rules and goals per se, but it really requires also a change in the beliefs and attitudes, that is to say, the mindsets and the values of public servants, to ensure that they reorient their behavior to attain the goals of that particular institution. So working together with schools of public administration from around the world, we have devised a mindset and competency framework to implement the SDGs in public institutions. This has been done through a co-creation process. And some of the mindsets are very much also aligned with the UN 2.0 quintet of change. For example, foresight mindset is needed, a results-oriented, digital mindset, evidence-based mindset, and of course, responsive empathy. And these are aligned to the goal 16 of the 2030 agenda around effectiveness, inclusiveness, and accountability. Now, working with schools of public administration, we also devise a set of strategies. And based on our approach in capacity development, what we have realized is that it's important to put in place strategies at a holistic level that looks both, that looks at the individual level. So what kind of changes, what kind of strategies can be implemented? Also the organizational level and the institutional level in order to promote a change in mindsets. And as other colleagues have mentioned, shifting mindsets is an individual journey. So it is something that starts from the individual, but we have been working with countries at the local, national and local level to put in place a series of strategies that can help also in changing mindsets. And so what kind of approach have we used? Well, first of all, we used an approach that is based on a training of trainers because we wanted to promote sustainability of the change so that we intervene, but really we work with partners on the ground, the UN RCOs, as well as the schools of public administration. And our approach is based on experiential learning. So, of course, there are some presentations about concepts, but it's really through experience, reiteration, prototyping, as our colleagues mentioned before, that there can be understanding, uncovering of what are the beliefs, and then how do you also understand what are the basic principles of the 2030 agenda. We have also 11 principles of effective governance. So it's bringing awareness about those principles as well. And then how can we promote change? And based on our experience, it's very important to be context driven and start from a very concrete problem of public concern to the country with which we are working, so that then they can go through that and apply specific mindsets, for example, an innovation experimental mindset or a foresight mindset or a digital mindset, and then unpacking those and seeing how that can help. And we've been working with, at the regional level with the regional commissions. We have also been working with different countries, so co-creating approaches every time. So although we do have toolkits, but they are always customized to the needs of the specific country. We've been working, for example, with Pakistan now. The training on changing mindsets is part of the curriculum of the schools of public administration at various levels. We've been working with Seychelles, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Guatemala, and we'll be happy to answer any questions during the chat. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Adriana. Okay, so now if you go to, it's great, thank you for stopping sharing. So Anna, for all of our participants, please turn on your cameras. We're going to have a bit of a Q&A at the end here. So I'll try to cover as many questions as we can. So going back to Caroline at the start. So there are a few questions for you regarding, first of all, how do social norms relate to safety? Feel free to answer which ones you'd like, and I'll give you maybe 2 minutes each. So choose what you'd like to answer in these 2 minutes. How do social norms relate to safety culture? How do cultural patterns relate to context? And also some thinking around, just getting started in this space. how do we leverage some of the methods you're speaking to earlier, the quantitative and qualitative? What would you say for people getting started with these? You know, you mentioned sort of the relatively where colleagues could go, but in the initial stages there. So hopefully it gives you a little bit to reflect upon in 2 minutes. Over to you, Caroline. Oh, did you hear me? Are you still there?
I was on mute again. Yes.
Great. Okay.
No, I didn't read them in advance, so I'll try to do the best I can here. Two of the things that I heard that I think I can respond to are this question about how does social norms relate to safety culture, and then another one about what about the validity of the people who are maybe not following the safety norms. You know, how do you deal with that? So first of all, social norms and culture. So there's so much fascinating evidence and research on the extent to which people do what other people do, even if they don't know why they're doing it. And, you know, part of it, some of the theory underlying that is that because we're social animals, we want to fit in. And the way to fit in is to kind of, you know, go with the group and you know, dress the way they dress and, you know, all of that. And so if you establish social norms as part of your safety culture, that encourage people to follow these safety procedures and to speak up when they have questions and to, you know, be open in their communications. If you create that as a norm, then people kind of automatically do it. You don't have to chase them around and you know, club them over the head and say, why don't you do what you're supposed to do? So the social norms that you create as part of the culture serve to build and reinforce the culture, you know, kind of like automatically. So I think that that's a critical factor, is just what's the norm here. I mean, you can probably even think in your own experience where maybe something was written about what you're supposed to do, but you know what everybody really does, and you just follow what the people really do instead of maybe what they're supposed to do. The other, do I have a few more minutes or one? Or we
About 30 seconds maybe, if you can
30
summarize.
seconds.
Yeah.
So regarding these people who maybe aren't following the norm, and how do you trust the validity of the data they provide? Two things, and this is very quick. I'll be happy to follow up after if you want to email. You know, number one, we try to do our sampling for the qualitative data. The survey is for everyone. Qualitative data, we try to do random sampling to get representativeness so that we do talk to people from all parts of the organization. Some are going to be all happy and, you know, just right, and some not so much. But some people are unwilling to say that they're not doing the things that they're supposed to do. And so the way to really kind of get that information is, number one, the way you structure the questions that you ask and the dynamic that you create in the interview. And the second is through observation, when there's a disconnect between what people are saying and what they're doing. And then kind of a third piece is what other people say about what happens when people don't follow the norms. So very quickly, that's a few comments on the questions, and thank you for the questions.
All right, great. Thank you for that, Caroline. We could do a lot more on safety culture. Okay, so now I want to take on a few questions for you. I see you've already answered one about in-group, out-group. There's some questions more how you're thinking about that, what the implications of that, what that could mean. There's also a question around trust and how you're really unpacking that within the UN context and your reflections on that idea.
Yeah.
Did you want to start with those?
Yeah,
Okay, go with
let me,
those.
let me just dive in, right? So I think on the notion of trust, right? In this particular project, we were looking, of course, in the human capital space as it relates to recruitment. And the way we kind of thought about trust is really around risk, right? Do you trust someone to be able to give you, in this case, a CV assessment that would you're willing to accept by virtue of the fact that it would limit the risk of, you know, you interviewing that person, talk to that person, assess that person, essentially bringing them on in a way that is perhaps risk-free or in a reduced risk setting. And we think about broadly within the UN ecosystem, at least in the Secretariat, and perhaps more in DOS, you know, we are a fairly risk-averse environment, right? And especially within the human capital space, knowing that at times we're making hiring decisions that are, and I'll use the word permanent semi-loosely, but are fairly restricted in terms of when someone's in, you know, the ability for someone who's perhaps not viable to take them out of the system. By virtue of that, for us, it really came down to the notion of risk and how can we ensure that in this process, you know, if I'm gonna accept someone's decision by virtue of them, I'm also understanding that like they're making I'm accepting the risk that they've already perhaps added to the process. So for us, I think that component of risk was quite important to think through. On the question regarding what do we think about an actual like application, right? So yes, so the notion of in-group, out-group is pretty standard in the industry. For us, it's kind of the notion of like priming, nudging, and salience. But what information can it provide? And again, we can think here either the hiring context or otherwise when we're working with people. What information can I prime them with that would help them understand that I'm part of the in-group, right? And by virtue of that, by virtue of having some shared set of values, experiences, norms, goals, whatever you decide as that underlying notion of trust to be, that they will then accept whatever that you're doing. That's not obviously just intertwined to decision making. That's just, I think, a general best practice. So we think about how to engage with people. But for us, that ability to understand that there are now levers that we can perhaps pull, there's information that we can perhaps give someone about, how a decision was made, and perhaps more importantly, who made it, right? That doesn't mean that I need to give a name and say like, oh, Mary made the decision. I can give demographics, right? Mary is a tenured UN staff. Mary has worked, has 10 years experience in X, Y, Z. Essentially, things that I might care about that might then influence me to accept what Mary's decision was, and by virtue of that might accept it. And there's a few more questions in the chat. I'll kind of pause here because I know we have a couple more
If you
speakers.
can, thanks, Gagan. If you want to respond to them directly, maybe you can do that in the next few minutes. But I think that's great remarks. It really kind of underscores the importance of context and what these trust in-group, out-group, these are all contextual things that mean different things in different contexts. So what it means in DOS is different from another organization. So lots there to unpack. Okay, I will stop talking, turn back to our speakers. If you can all stay with us for maybe an extra 5 minutes, we can get to all of the panelists. There are a couple other colleagues joining us from DESA today. So Juliana, I mean, I think you've looked at the questions already. I can try to, excuse me, paraphrase some of them, but feel free to answer whichever ones you think you can address. But there are some interesting ones here. Regarding, first of all, will AI change people's behavior? Your thoughts on that, given your experience with behavioral science, if you want to comment on that. But then also, in terms of the different values, in terms of certain things might be harder to change than others. There's also a question regarding the way the values and survey where it was carried out, it was done in collaboration with people. Do you think that has led to maybe a way that implications now in terms of how it's implemented? So I'll turn it over to you to answer as much as that as you.
All right, thank you. Wow, that's the first one's a big one. What do I think? Will AI change people's behavior? I think what we need to say, and I think that's why it's important that we have a deep understanding of our values as well. I think what changes is how we demonstrate, our values. So of course we're going to change the practices based on the development of new technologies, including generative AI. But I feel that we need to, if we keep the principles in our minds, we need to think about, okay, how we can demonstrate these behaviors, considering these developments in technology as well. So I think there will be a shift, but again, it needs to be grounded on principles as well. And I think the principles will help us navigate that. Which value do you think is the hardest change? I think, culture change is a very long-term process. And it's quite iterative. You give 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and you have to be quite patient and resilient to go through it. But I will share that when we were developing the values and behaviors, which was a revision of the 1999 competency framework, one of the most controversial elements of the new framework was the value of humility, because of the connotation that it has in different cultures as well. In some cultures, humility means weakness, or always agreeing, not speaking truth to power, etc. So we had, and that was the one that we always came back to, and we had extensive consultations around that specific value, and we came to the conclusion that it was important, also based through consultations with the staff, through both surveys. It got more than 90% of staff agreed that it was important for them personally and for the organization. And where we had to pay very careful attention is how it was defined. So when we launched the framework, the first outreach activities we did was like, So the UN is a weak organization because of humility. And it's like, no, you have to look at humility of what it means to the Secretariat, as it's defined by the Secretariat, which means a lot that, being aware that we don't have all the answers, and the organization take into consideration also the insights of others, including the local knowledge of the places where we are, etc. So I wouldn't say that there are any values that's the hardest to change. It's also not a change, it's a shift. It's an evolution of the previous values that the organization are grounded to. It's still aligned to the UN Charter, which is the founding document. Finally, there was another question around how to engage senior leadership. Engaging senior leadership, you have to go through senior leadership. So in our case, it has been very important to engage with the Secretary General. It has to come through him. And I think one of the big wins that we had on this was that in 2022, a set of leadership dialogues was carried out around the 4 values of the Secretariat. So in that process, all leaders at all levels had the responsibility within a 6-month period to carry out a dialogue process around the 4 values. Of course, we produced the material that went through it, and we prepared them to facilitate those dialogue processes. And the other question around the engagement process that we took to establish the values and behaviors, I answered in writing.
Got it.
But
Okay.
it's super important.
Yes, yeah.
With people. Yeah.
For sure. So good. You've answered all the questions. Great. So check out the response if you want to see Juliana's response to that one. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Now on to our colleagues. We have a few other colleagues with us from DESA here. We also have Veronique and Christina, along with Adriana. So there are a few questions that came in about, first, how you measure mindsets. So maybe just elaborating more how you measure changes in mindsets. And then also, how do you take into account cultural context? You mentioned the different countries in which you're working. How do you adapt to the different cultures, and what kind of approach do you take with that? So over to you for your response on those 2 questions. Any of the colleagues from DESA, Christina or Veronique or Adriana might want to come in. Yeah, Chris.
Christina, I see
Thank you.
Christina ready. Yeah.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you for the opportunity. I think I'll address the question on the cultural context in changing mindsets, because I think communication is fundamental when we're working on capacity development, which is demand-driven. So the countries approach us and ask us for support in changing the public sector attitudes towards implementing innovation, strategic mindset, or how to improve the delivery of public services. So a key component is to understand where they are and where they want to go, what vision they have. And then we work for many months in understanding their needs and adapting the toolkits that we provided the link on the chat of how to contextualize the exercises and the training materials to the needs of the organization they were working with. So that comes from understanding, what's the need to have gender balance, indigenous understandings of what is public value and what is public service delivery. So we try to contextualize the exercises, the training, and the delivery, involving the stakeholders in the delivery, because they, at the end of the day, are empowered with this information. So it's a balance of understanding needs, vision, communication, and co-creation and collaboration with the stakeholders. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Veronique, would you like to come in as well on that point too?
Well, I think there was a question on with regards to the aspect of how do you measure change and change in the cultural mindset. In the mindset, we've done, as Adriana was explaining, we've done now a number of trainings, capacity buildings with the resident coordinator office in Pakistan, and also with the National School of Public Policy and the Civil Service Academy, which is basically an 18 weeks training that is very often very theoretically based. But what we have done is a very practical oriented sessions on changing mindsets that basically pushes them outside of their their comfort zone. So all the exercises are also focused on very often focused on their own culture that they work in, with Pakistan, Muslim community, where the participation of women is a challenge. So we try to make sure that there is a proper engagement also of a proper gender balance. But I think what we have seen throughout now 9 sessions is that, for example, which I think is a good outcome, the persons, the senior civil servants that have been trained, some of them are now taking the initiative, having moved towards the next stage in their career. For example, one has been now initiating an exercise on strategic foresight, an initiative engaging with the district level, provincial level, and national level, also civil society and academics, to make sure that they can jointly develop a vision, which is unique for Pakistan. It's a very hierarchical organization, very hierarchical civil service. And basically that shows that, and also based on the comments on the trainings, that it has provided change in the way of thinking, and the fact that they can do something themselves, that they can actually be part of that change and be the trigger of change, basically. So I think that this is a good result of the different trainings that we have provided. That's just one initiative, but as I said, in the context of Pakistan, a very important one. And we are going to collaborate now further to basically also now further the communication and collaboration between national and local level, which is again a very big challenge in a huge country like Pakistan.
Great, thank you for that, Veronique, as well. I think there's a lot to unpack here. Adriana, would you like to come up with some final words on this topic? Any other comments?
Yes, I saw there is a question about, how do you shift mindsets, in public servants, in difficult contexts where maybe, what are the incentives, in other words, when you have security and so, I think that, and also based on the research that we did in our publication, that there are 3 core psychological needs of human beings, and these 3 are mastery, so developing really excellence in what you do. The second one is having a sense of belonging, so understanding that you belong, to an organization, you're part of that organization. And the third one is meaning. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say is that it's important to foster these 3 within the organization, so that people can feel a sense of mastering, belonging, and meaning. And that, of course, comes, from the leadership, but also the structure, the incentives. But these 3 are very important for human beings, and therefore they can be nurtured. And this can produce excellence in public organizations.
On that note, Adriana, I think that's a really concise way to think about how we can take some of these lessons forward in the work that we do. So thank you for that. All right, so we've already gone over time by quite a few minutes. There's quite a lot of discussion amongst all of you. So thank you so much for joining us today and for your questions and your presentations from the panelists. So there'll be a recording of this webinar on the YouTube playlist on our website. We'll share that with you shortly. And there are also, as you mentioned, some other Behavioral Science Week sessions taking place over the coming few days. So looking forward to seeing you hopefully there. Thank you so much for everyone. And yeah, see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.